One of the stories that's been going under the radar because the Browns, quite frankly, from if you're covering them from a local perspective, have had so many issues that a lot of people have had to focus on. But one of the things that have really not been discussed is Myles Garrett, the season he's having. I mean, he's a half sack away from tying his career year at 13 and a half. He's at 13 right now. And, he's a full sack away from having his career high in sacks. He's on pace right now to at least approach the sack record, if not break the sack record. But yet, there's not a lot of discussion about Myles Garrett and Defensive Player of the Year. And I think a lot of that has to do with the defense, quite frankly, on the Cleveland Browns is not being very good. So the question I'm here to ask today is, can Myles Garrett win Defensive Player of the Year on a bad defense? Well, let's talk about it. Now, Defensive Player of the Year is one of those interesting awards, right? It's not like Offensive Player of the Year where one player kind of grabs the narrative, or MVP, where one player grabs the narrative and really dominates the season from a news and a on the field standpoint, and you kind of know that they're going to get the MVP. You have to remember that all of these awards are voted on by various different sports writers. And when that is the case, it's going to be about who they want to give the award to, what the narrative is that they want to give the award to, and all of those things combined based on raw numbers. These aren't necessarily people who have broken down and watched every play, and I'm not out here advocating for such a system just because these awards. I don't know if there's a better way to do them than how they do it now, just because I don't think you're gonna be able to get the thoroughness that you want out of a beat writer. So this brings the Browns to an interesting situation because we know Myles is beloved in Cleveland, but we also know that Myles' persona and how he is viewed varies wildly from state to state, city to city, person to person, right? There's some people who who call for this man to go to jail because of a fight on a football field, and they're not willing to let that one go for whatever reason, even though they've let it go for other players. And there are people who love Myles Garrett, right? And that's one of the weird situations he finds himself in. The other one is that the Browns defense is not that good. So not only does it, even though his sack numbers can be undeniable, you have an escape route when it comes to not voting for Myles Garrett as Defensive Player of the Year, because you can say TJ Watt put up comparable numbers. His defense is better. He's a better defensive player than Myles Garrett. You can say maybe you want to give it to Trayvon Diggs. I don't know who else is in the Defensive Player of the Year running. Aaron Donald, you know what I mean? Because the theory would be, well, how good and how great can a player be for a defense if the defense isn't that good, right? And that is an argument you can make. But let's ask that question, right? Can you really win Defensive Player of the Year without having a defense that's in the top five? Now, what do I mean by top five? I'm going to go by scoring percentage, right? The amount of percentage it is expected that a team scores on you. This is on Pro Football Reference. You can look it up yourself and double check me if you wish. But of the last 10 Defensive Player of the Year, so since 2010, I think 2 have not been in the top 10 when it came to scoring percentage. Obviously, I'm starting at the lowest, right? So 2 of those defenses for a player who's won Defensive Player of the Year have not been top 10 defenses in terms of scoring percentage. Now, top 10 defense is a bit of an arbitrary term just because you can flip up and cut up a stat any which way you want it and then figure out a way to call any defense a top 10 defense or the best defense. But I think scoring percentage, I think that's probably, we can all agree, one of the most important jobs of a defense is to stop the other team from scoring. So if you have a low scoring percentage, that usually means you have a pretty good defense. Right now, the 2021 Browns are about 20 in the NFL. They're not the worst. They're not the best. They're middling. They're 20th. I know that comes as a surprise to people because some people think that this is the worst defense in the NFL. It's not. It's just not a great defense. 20th. The other two players who have won Defensive Player of the Year without having a top 10 defense when it comes to scoring percentage, Khalil Mack in 2016, my bad. And in 2018, it was Aaron Donald. Now, Khalil Mack is a bit of a weird one because sacks were just low that year, and he only had 11. He beat out Von Miller, which is controversial, who Von had, I believe, like 13 and a half sacks that year. Still not like the highest of high numbers. It's kind of shockingly low for a whole season. But yeah, that was that situation in 2016. Both of those defenses, by the way, I think actually Von was on the better defense that year, and they gave it to Khalil Mack, and they mainly gave it to Khalil Mack because everybody loved Khalil Mack, right? It was a narrative award. It was kind of people just wanted to give the award to Khalil Mack. And I remember during that season, you can feel that energy. It shocked me that he only had 11 sacks because if you listen to how people talked about Khalil Mack that year, it was obvious that he was the one that they wanted to give Defensive Player of the Year. So it gave this impression that he had a much more statistically impressive year than just 11 sacks. But nonetheless, 11 sacks, and his defense was ranked about 20th in the NFL. Same thing with Aaron Donald in 2018. 20 and a half sacks. Now, he earned that one, right? 20 and a half sacks. And his defense, the Rams' defense in 2018, when it comes to scoring percentage, was about 20th as well. So, yeah, just looking at that, it is possible for Myles Garrett to win Defensive Player of the Year without being on a top 10 defense. Now, what makes this more important is that the other competitor for Defensive Player of the Year, the only other guy I think is TJ Watt, and TJ Watt's not on a top 10 defense right now when it comes to scoring defense. Now, if TJ Watt were like on the number one defense in football, that would change things. That would change the math for Myles Garrett. Because if you look at what happened to Justin Houston when it came to J.J. Watt, I believe in 2014, I think it was 2014, correct me if I'm wrong, but Justin Houston almost broke Michael Strahan's sack record. Like, he got to 21 sacks. I think the sack record's 21 and a half. So he almost broke the single season sack record. Did not get Defensive Player of the Year. They gave it to J.J. Watt, because J.J. was on the number one defense when it comes to scoring percentage in football. So what have we learned from just kind of like those numbers and how that relates to Myles Garrett is Myles can put up some spectacular numbers this year. The defense can continue to be what the defense is, and that is a very mediocre, middling, average defense in the NFL. That's what the Browns have. They're not the worst defense in the NFL. That would take them out the running, but they're definitely not a top 15 defense right now. They're in that middle ground. They're like 20th in the NFL. So with that being the case, what it would take for Myles Garrett to win Defensive Player of the Year, one, you probably need TJ Watt to slow down for a couple of games so he's not as hot on your tail, so those sack numbers aren't comparable, even though the pressure numbers aren't really comparable between the two. But I don't know how much all the writers who vote for this value pressure numbers. I know people who are deep in the NFL community, people who are deep in NFL stats, really value pressures almost more than we value sacks, but it's not the same people voting for Defensive Player of the Year. So I don't know how they value that. If you just look at sacks, you can make a comparable argument. If you look at pressures and two, you can't really make the same argument there. But probably has to get to 20 plus sacks. If he breaks the single season sack record, he's gonna have to win Defensive Player of the Year. Like, it would be foolish not to give him it. He probably has to play at an undeniable level too for the last part of the season, which would probably mean, getting to that sack record number. But yeah, that's probably what it's going to take for Myles Garrett to win Defensive Player of the Year. Will it take TJ Watt that same thing? No, it's not going to take TJ Watt that same thing, because TJ Watt is not on a bad defense right now. TJ Watt does not have, the mixed opinions about him to the level that Myles Garrett has about him. TJ Watt is a Watt, and they love Watts. Like, the media loves the Watts. Like, they love the JJ Watt got like 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. They begging to give TJ one. So, you know, you kind of have to make it undeniable. And I'm not saying it's a Steeler bias. I'm saying that is a Watt bias. They love the Watts. But yeah, it's gonna be an uphill battle for Myles Garrett to win this Defensive Player of the Year this year. I don't think it's at all guaranteed, and I don't even think he's the favorite right now, just because the hype is relatively low. Nobody's really talking about Myles Garrett, even though he has 13 sacks, and that's a tall tale sign that they don't want to give him that award. So if he wants to get it, he has to make it undeniable. The only way for Myles Garrett to make that undeniable is if he breaks the single season sack record. The defense can help out by not being complete poo around him, but I've given up on begging for consistency out of this Cleveland Browns defense. So if anything, Myles Garrett can create some consistency there, but it's going to be a tough race for him. There are people approaching in this race. There are people trying to catch him. You would think 13 sacks in 10 games would be enough to have you have a nice, healthy lead in the sack conversation, but TJ Watt got 12 and a half right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. I just wanted to discuss this. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Do you think Myles Garrett, can win Defensive Player of the Year on the path that he's on, even though the Browns defense isn't that good? And also, do you think he should? If the Browns defense continues to be middling, and the Browns record continues to be middling, do you think that he should or is deserving of winning Defensive Player of the Year, even if he either ties, approaches, or breaks a sack record? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. It's something interesting that I thought of, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So thank you guys for watching this video. Please have a good day and have a great night.